We are all welcome. Okay, over to you, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. Okay, so good evening, everyone. We started this series from the introduction, talking about the procedure involved in machine learning. Then we started with supervised learning, and we did quite a number of models. We considered quite a number of models, and both the theoretical and the practical aspects. That is a lab session. But today, we are going to proceed and look at the supervised learning, talking about clustering and principal component analysis. In clustering, we have two types of clustering. We have hierarchical clustering and k-means clustering. And we are going to be looking at that. And when we are done with clustering, we look at the principal component analysis. And the clustering, just like I said, k-means clustering is divided into three: the single linkage, the average linkage, and the complete linkage. And when you talk about supervised learning as a whole, it assumes that there's no variable that is important, talking about supervised learning. Unlike the supervised, where we have a particular variable being dependent and some other variables are independent. We have dependent and independent, but in unsupervised learning, what we are interested in the similarities among a set of variables. Okay, now we are going to be talking about the hierarchical clustering and the k-means clustering. Okay, next slide, please. In the case of the hierarchical clustering, the idea is just to agglomerate, to bring out some features in a set of data, and usually is from bottom up agglomerative clustering. And the procedure involved in the algorithm is the first thing we have to do when we are considering hierarchical clustering is to start each individual. Then we identify the closest two clusters and merge them. We end, so we merge those two clustering. Now, I said earlier, we have single linkage, complete linkage, and average linkage. The single linkage looks for two similar points closest. In the case of the complete linkage, it looks at the distance between clusters, the maximum distance between them, any pair of points. Whereas the single linkage looks at what the minimum distance. While average, as the name implies, is the average distance between any pair of points from the two clusters. Okay. Now, there are ways to measure distance. One of it is what the Euclidean distance. Euclidean distance, as we all know, distance between 2 points. AG is equal to square root of x1 minus x2 squared plus y2 minus y2 squared. That is a Euclidean distance. We also have Manhattan distance. Manhattan distance is absolute value of the difference between two, maybe x1, x2 plus, comma y1 Y2. That's absolute value, Manhattan distance. Then we also have correlation-based distance. And based on that, before we start the lab session, I would like to briefly talk about how this is computed manually. Now look at this example here. Say use correlation-based distance, okay, to draw the corresponding dendrogram based on complete linkage. Now, we have 5 variables here altogether. Now, we want to use correlation-based distance, and the correlation matrix is already given. So when we look at this table, we'll look at the least value there. Apart from the diagonal, the least value there is 0.04. So what we are going to do is to merge, look at where it falls. It falls between 5 and 2. So we merge 2 and 5 together. That will form a cluster, and we are going to proceed from there. Next slide, please. So if we merge the 2 clusters together, the next iteration, we will see that when we do it manually, we will see that the next one will be 0.36. And that can be found between 1 and 3. So we merge 1 and 3 together again. Then the third iteration would be, we look at, we already have 2 and 5 earlier. Then 4 again will be the smallest in the matrix that we merge them together. That gives us the clusters. Now, looking at the diagram here, next slide, please. Now, look at this dendrogram. The dendrogram shows the clustering, the hierarchical clustering based on the complete linkage. I think it's complete. So in complete linkage, we look for the maximum distance. After we have identified the list, we now compute the maximum distance based on what we have in the matrix. Now, to do in the lab session, we are going to be considering the particular data set obtained from the library ISLR. And that particular data set is about cancer, various types of cancer, and is of dimension 64 by 6,000 something. So that is what we are going to use to demonstrate this during the lab session. When we get there, we are going to discuss that further. Please, next slide. Okay, now when we look at this particular script, this script actually gives us the procedure. I think this is blurry. Yeah, the procedure involved, talking about the library we need to get. After calling library ISLR, we also call library R Collabora. Then we look at the, okay, now look at the data distribution. When we say this, simply means is going to give us a n by n matrix so that the data will be well structured. We have a view of the data as ought to be for easy visualization and analysis. Now, to obtain our clusters based on complete linkage, we have the script up there. Then the next one is average linkage. Then the next one is single linkage. When we get to the lab session, we are going to be doing all that. Okay.
Programming. Research. Data.
Now, after computing After conducting the analysis, this is a linkage. This is a linkage, the hierarchical clusters that we have. We can see that those ones that are similar, they are clustered together, and we're able to know where they are grouped. That's for complete linkage. And for average linkage, let's see the average linkage. I think is this single now, average. Okay, look at how the average linkage looks like. This is based on the average between the distance between two clusters. That's what we have. Look at how they are clustered. Then let's consider the next cluster, and that is a single linkage. Okay, single linkage. That's what we have for the clustering. Okay, next slide, please. Now, in this, the clusters that we have, single linkage will tend to yield a trailing clusters, very large clusters onto which individual sample attached one by one. On the other hand, we can see that the complete linkage and average linkage tend to yield more balanced, attractive clusters. So therefore, that's why complete and average linkage is usually recommended, because their clusters are trailing and they are attractive. Okay, but when we look at the cell lines within simple cancer type, you can see do tend to what cluster together, although the clustering is not perfect. Okay, in the case of the clustering. Now we can as well cut the dendrogram based on, we can cut the dendrogram and you can see the script required to cut the dendrogram. This particular one cut it at a point so that it can divide it into 4 and 4 distinct clusters. And that is a script for it. When we get to the lab session, we are going to be seeing all that. So please, next slide. Okay, now this is at the point where the clusters were actually cut, and you can see at the point 159 or so, you can see that by so doing, you'll be able to cut it into 4. Okay, so that's it. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think I've discussed this already. Next slide, please. Talking about its separation. Okay, now we move to k-means clustering. K-means, as a name implies, what we do is when we have a set of data, in the difference between, I think in the slide I was meant to share, I actually applied the difference between hierarchical clustering and k-means clustering. Yeah, one major difference between hierarchical and k-means clustering is that in hierarchical clustering, you don't have predetermined, in most cases, clusters. But in k-means clustering, you predetermine number of clusters you want your data set to fall into, and you assign. Now, and that is not the case of what hierarchical clustering in most cases. Now, the thing we are going to do is that the initial thing we do, we identify the number of clusters, like I mentioned. For instance, k equals to 3. We have already said, okay, we want 3 clusters. Now, if we have a data set, we now determine, we look, and we already have center of those clusters. we have center of the clusters. So based on the center of the clusters that have been identified, the data automatically are arranged based on where their center falls. The first iteration takes place that way. Then the next iteration would be that you now take the mean of those set of data that falls into a particular cluster. Then the center, that is the mean now form the center of the next iteration. Then we continue like that until the clusters do not change. When the clusters don't change again, then we have reached convergence. And that will now determine the final cluster. And that will determine the final grouping of the clusters. Now, that is how K-means clustering works. And a derivation of that, or similar to that, you have K-mode. K-mode works as the name implies. You get the mode, you find the mode in each case to form the center of the cluster. The same thing with K-median clustering, but those ones are not as popular as K-means clustering. Okay, next slide, please. You can see the inputs, the initialization, the assignment, and all. Okay, now let's look at this example, a manual example. Assuming we have this data set, -2, -1, up to 16.65. Now, and we are already predetermined that we want this data to be in 3 clusters. It has been predefined, predetermined. So what we do is we now get the center of those clusters. Now, we now arrange this data set to close to where their center is close to. When we look at this data set now, -2 up to 13, their center is what is 13. So they automatically tilt towards 13. All right. Then the next one is 13.5 is another center. So when we look at it, 13 is actually closer to 13.5 than any other one. Then the other cluster is 16.5, cluster 3. So we do the next iteration. Now we have new center of clusters. Now we do the iteration again and see where the center that they are closest to, until when we continue at the point until when there is no changes in the clustering, and that point we have gotten to convergence. Then we now stick to what the clusters that we have. That forms the clusters that we have. And that is how K-means clustering is done. Okay. Now, next slide, please. Okay. Now we're talking about the third iteration, then we talk about the convergence. Okay. Now, and this has been explained. At the end of the day, the earlier data set that we have 3 clusters, -2, -1, 1, 5, and 5.5. We also have 9.1, 13, and 30.8, and 16.5. Those are the final clusters that we have, but their centers are also defined. So 1.7, 11.967, and 16.5. Those are their centers, and our final clusters have been defined based on the original data set that we have. Next slide, please. Now, the lab session, in the K-means clustering example, we are considering a data set called IRIS. IRIS is a 155 by 150 data set, talking about the characteristics of a certain flower. And those flowers, they are the species actually. They are called fascicular, semusotal, and the other one. So those are the 3 classifications of the iris that contains the iris data set. So now the first thing we do is we call our library data set we set our seed, we call our library R color, then we proceed. Then we look at clustering. For two, the first thing I have here is we have for two clusters, and the script required for that is already here. And for three clusters, we have the script, and as it progresses. Then at a point, we now try to use hierarchical clustering to see how it looks. And that is what we have there. We can see what the hierarchical clustering gives us, and the output is already there. So next slide, please. Okay, now using for the k equals to 2, you can see that for the sepal length, we have the clustering. We can see the green and the blue. See how the data set are being separated into the various clusters. We can see how they are separated. Right? Okay, k equals to 3. We can see that this data set has been clustered into 3: the sepal length, the sepal width, the petal length, and petal width. And you can see what they look like when they are clustered into 3. Okay. So next slide. All right, mixture models. Now, talking about mixture models, approach to clustering, we can see that both hierarchical clustering and k-means are unstable and sensitive to small changes in the data. They are unstable. Due to the instability, there's an introduction of mixture models helps to solve the problem, and that is we can see using expectation maximization algorithm by Bishop 2006, and that particular text is pattern recognition by Bishop, and the 2006. Okay. Now, and to do that, there's a package called mclust. In the package mclust, the function to do this is provided, and the BIC, we know normally our selection criteria says that the model with the minimum AIC, BIC, and whatever IC, any model with smaller of such is more preferred or outperform the other one. Reverse is the case in the case of mixture model. The bigger the BIC, the better the model. So, and that is what we are considering.
Sorry, I think at this point, let me just stop sharing. So we continue from there. We'll continue for the second phase now. Can you see the slide though?
Yes, I can. Okay, so Now, when we have the M class, okay.
Are you there?
Yes, I'm there. I'm there.
Okay.
So, now before this, we have the script, and this is what we have after hitting that. Now we can see that our BIC, you can see that models, there are a number of models there, like 14 models altogether. But among them is the one that has the highest BIC is around minus 600. So the model is adjudged better for to describe the relationship. And that is how it works. Next slide, please. And you see the clusters produced using mixture models. Okay, we can see the clusters. Okay, similar to that of K-means clustering, hierarchical clustering, but the difference is that you see that this gives us a kind of more distinct. You can see that some of them did not mix up. There was no mix up in this particular clustering as compared to when we use the K-means clustering and the hierarchical. So you can see how this one gives us distinct clusters. So that's what we have. Next slide, please. Okay, now we move to principal component analysis. Now, like I mentioned earlier, unsupervised learning procedure is such that there's no, I think my laptop is on now. There's no important variable. One variable is not important than the other.
Should I stop sharing?
Yes, maybe I should just start. I will just come from my own end.
Okay, over to you.
Recording in progress.
Yes. Let me leave this. Okay.
Yes, it's okay.
All right. So now let me move to where okay. Okay, I've gone past this, You can see how beautiful this looks compared to when we used the other clustering method. Now to principal components, you have left clustering now. Another type of unsupervised learning is a principal component analysis. And what this does is dimension reduction procedure.
And the idea is just to maximize the variance. Assuming we have up to 50 components, maybe 50 variables. Now, what this does is to reduce the components such that the minimal component can describe the characteristic, the relationship among the variables, even in data set. So using the unsupervised learning approach, we use a particular, maybe like 2 or 3 components to be able to describe the relationship among the variables. And from our mathematics, we can see that equation 1, starting from we are projecting from m to d dimension, and we have w sub to d vector. So when we subject that to Lagrangian multiply, it gives us equation 1. Then we produce equation 2, which actually is a replica of the vector eigenvalue that we are familiar with. Okay, now we find the eigenvectors, we proceed from there, and we have the matrix. Now, we also have the PCR, which is called principal component regression. Equation 4 is a very popular linear model that we know, and equation 5 is estimation of our parameters there. Okay, now, and if our x prime x is a singular matrix, that is the absolute value of that equals to 0, then we have our orthogonal cos, which is our t, and loading p. That gives us equation 6. Then we proceed, and when we see x equals to x star, that x star is singularly mean the centering. There's a way you compute the centering by finding the mean first, then you subtract each of the values from the mean that you have obtained. That is that centering. That is an x, that star you have above there. Okay. Now we also, at the end of the day, we obtain equation 8, which is different from the original data set that we have, the parameters. So now to demonstrate that, we're going to be using a data set called Boston data. And we have used this data set if I just like to use it, so that the data set we are familiar with, talking about the housing values in the suburb of Boston, and is of 506 rows and 14 columns, and the columns are described as given below. Then we have our lab session. We call our library mass, because the Boston data set is in mass, that library called mass. Then we call our PLS. This function will help us to obtain our principal component analysis. Then we train 1 to 490, we train. Then we do our tests based on the remaining 15, yeah. So, and this is what we do. I define this as B-fits, PCR, we have all these variables there. Then we say the validation that we are going to use is leave out one cross validation. In the first class, we talk about various types of cross validation. K means leave out one cross validation. And the other one, the bootstrap method. And so now when we do this summary, B-fit gives us the output. Then we do other things. These are the plots, remains. We do this plot. Then these are the plots, which I'm going to still going to explain later. Now, let's say we have, this plot is telling us that out of the 12, 13 variables at the point 8, we can cut it at that point. That means from 1 to 8 is sufficient to describe what happens in the data set. Then we have our R-square plots. This also gives our R-square plots, number of components. Okay, then our root mean square, you have CV and adjusted CV. Okay, then our loading value, look at the loading value that we described in the earlier equation. Now, looking at this, it varies. We can just liken it to our R, which is a correlation coefficient. You see, at this point, look at the black part, the black one, look at the key. Component 1, you can see that it represents the black dark, the thick one, which shows that in component 10, 10th variable is most important in component 1, which is tax. Tax actually describe what happened to Boston, the housing in that particular place, and that is already giving us a component in the variable 10. So in component 1, that variable actually is very, very important, and you can see it's as strong as close to 0.9, which is 90%. Then in the red one, which is what is it? Okay, now look at the red one. Red one towards the highest there is what is 12. It's not 12, and that 12 actually I think is the proportion of blacks by town. So the number of blacks in the town determines the cost, or the how they fix the rent or the cost of the house there. Then the third component, which is a green, is actually a negative effect. It has a negative effect, which is component 7, and that is age, proportion of owners occupied units built prior to 1940. It has a strong negative impact on the occupation, on owners of the house there, you know. So median value of owner occupied homes. So you see, what it's trying to tell us is that people that live in a particular place, if the house is old, so they tend not to really be suitable. So now the unsupervised part, you know, this actually, the unsupervised part, more of this, we have the scripts described as this. You can see the script, we have our dev tools is required there. Then we can see they already defined their component 2 to 14 is considered a total of 13 variables. So at the end of the day, we have this is a description in different components. In component 1, you can see the relationship among these variables. You can see that in component 1, P ratio, lower status, all these ones, they have age, they have same positive relationship among themselves. Whereas the ones on the left actually indicate negative relationship. Though they don't have inverse. These ones on the left here don't have inverse relationship actually, but they only have inverse with those that are on the right-hand side. So that's just the difference there. So we move to the script plots. You can see from the script plots here, script plot tells us that, okay, first 2 components is sufficient to describe what happens there. So other components are good, but the emphasis will be based on the first 2 components. Okay. Now look at the cumulative proportion of variance explained. You can see, okay. Now I'll stop sharing this so that I can move to the lab session. This is just the preliminary session. Okay, right. Okay. All right. So I hope my screen is visible. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Is it clear now?
Yes, we can see.
All right, good. So I'm in a lab session now. Just like I said earlier, we are looking at the first thing we're going to be doing here is the hierarchical clustering. And like I said, we are going to be using NC I60 data in the ISLR, and it consists of various cancer data sets. So now the first thing we're going to do, we have our lines 2 We look at our lines 2. We do lines 2 here. Actually brings in the package in the library that we need to use. If we run this line, okay. Before you can use this package, you should already have it in your as one of your libraries. So I can call it whenever you need it. So we have the next thing is we call our data. We can look at these lines. These lines, then we can pick the dimension for us to see. Look at the dimension. We run these 3 lines. Okay. Okay, we can see the dimension. All right. So the data I want to use. Okay. Then the table is a bit slow. Okay. Now we can see that this is what we have. Different type of cancer. We have breast cancer, CNS, colon cancer, leukemia, renal, ovarian, and so many others. So that is what we have. Okay. So we can see what it looks like. 1, 2, 3 is about CNS, renal, breast, CNS, like that. All right. Now we also call this color bearer so that we'll be able to have our plots as beautiful in terms of different colors. It can give us display of colors. Okay. We have called in the library. That's lines 8. Then, if we do this, okay, you can see different colors. You can see the upper section there. Now this particular command is just for us to have our data distributed in different type of a kind of a matrix form, and we'll be able to use our Euclidean distance matrix just like we did in the example. That is what this particular command helps us to do. Now to proceed to lines 15 to 16 is about making the plot. Now you can see plots H plots. That function helps you. Now data does this. That is what we have already defined in line 10, because we scale the data down to what in the matrix form that is we need. Then we have our labels. We have NCI.lab. Main is complete linkage, X label, and all that. So we are going to be doing that. That gives us our complete linkage plots. If we do that command, so this is what it gives us. And those, the ones that are actually related based on their maximum distance from the center, they bring them together. And that is complete linkage. Now, if I'm doing complete linkage, you don't need to put method. Automatically, it will give you complete linkage. But if you want to do average linkage, you have to include your method. Whether you put in complete or not is going to give you the complete linkage plot. But in case of average, you have to put it. That's why we have method here in lines 18 to 19, we can see the method. I can run it now for the average linkage. You can see what we have. Okay. Now for the single linkage, is what we have. Okay. So, and that is it. Okay. So we have we want to create our clusters in form of table so that we can have a replica of the hierarchical clustering. So, and that is lines 25 to 27. So we have formed 4 clusters. You have selected 4 clusters now. All right. Now, let's look at what we have at the end of the day using. Okay, so let's have it. You have considered that, okay, we want to cut it at a point, which is this, so that we can have 4 distinct, just have them in group. We have one is here, and another one is there. So we have 4 different clusters from that end. Because of the last line that was used to demarcate them, we can see that 1, 2, 3, 4. Just look at it from the top. You see that it's already cutting through 4 main ones. So it groups those ones that are together, it brings them together. Now, we now go to the complete the k-means clustering using Irish data set. Now, just like we always do, we have our set seed. Set seed helps us to should we need to replicate these results, this analysis, we need to do it again, is to give us same result. That's why we use set seed. So we have set seed to be 2, set.c to be 2. Then our library, we call library data set, library our color bearer. So we already run this. So just like we did earlier, we have our, let's say we have line 37 to 38. We have a subset there. The subset is actually the species. Every other set apart from where are we? Okay, we have our species there. All right. Okay, so now let's look at the dimension now. The dimension for our iris, we have 155. Then if we look at our edge, we will see what it looks like. Okay, we have sepal length, sepal width, petal length, petal width, then species. So 5 variables, and it's by 150. Now, we want to conduct our clustering, 2 different clusters. So we run lines 43 to 45, and that gives us our clusters. You can see here. Now, like I said, if you look at sepal width, some of the green is still very close to the blue. If we look at sepal length too, we can see, so it's not really giving us distinct clusters as it should. And that was what I explained earlier in the case of mixture models. So when we have 3 clusters, these lines 48 to 50, 50 now gives us that. So for 3 clusters, that is done. We have that already. Okay. All right. Now, in this case now, this 51 is actually to compare with the hierarchical clustering that we have done, the example of what we have done before, try to see what it looks like, and that leads us to 51 there. Okay. Okay. No. All right, no. Arida said, okay, this is originally though, actually. Yes, based on three clusters. So that is that. That is what this actually means anyway. So the next thing we are going to be doing, that's 51 to 60. Actually, when we look at what is there, we also have our set seed to be 2. We have our km.out. We can name it anything. Is equal to k-means. We have our sd.data that we have defined earlier. We have our 4 number of n star to be 20. So we have our HC out. This sd.data that was actually defined earlier, talking about the n by n matrix. Then cut tree, 4, talking about 4 clusters. Then our table. So I will just do this all together, 55 to 60, so that to save our time. I'm running that already. Okay, so now looking at this particular table, we can see that we have 4 different clusters. One is grouped as 1, 2. In cluster 2, we have, it falls under, actually true 2 gives us 7. We have 3, 1 and 3 gives us 9. And so that's just the grouping that gives us when we have 4 clusters. Okay, now that's the grouping. So let's go to the mixture models now. The mixture models. Now in this, when we are doing these mixture models, we'll be looking at mclust. That's a package required to do the mixture models. So we have mclust. We call mclust in, since it's already in the library. We bring the mclust. Then set seed equals to 7. Then we can then run 64 to 66. Okay. So, and that's what we have. So just like we saw in the slide, these models, they actually represent different models. That's why it is called mixture model. There are 14 different models. And if you want to know more about it, you can check Bishop 2006, and there are later version of that material. So the summary now, which is line 68. Now look at the summary. You have our log likelihood, you have our n, degree of freedom, you have our BIC. Okay, so we have our interval there. Okay, all right, that is what we have, and you can see that the BIC is minus 561 points, and is actually the one that is when we look at it, is minus, it's close to 600. That does in this figure, and we trace the model that is, and that's supposed to give us, I think, VVV or something, because look at the color. It looks like that VVV or EVV, either of the two. So that model is actually we can't be displaying the models here. It's actually it may look a bit complicated. Now let's look at the plots now. The plots. Now, this is what was displayed earlier. Look at how this plot looks. It looks more decent than the earlier ones. And yeah, so, and that is it. So we now move to the last part, which is the principal component analysis. Now, I said earlier, if we are going to be using data sets, data called Boston, and the package required is another package that we're going to be using is PLS. Okay, now, having called the data set, we train 490, then we test on, that is, we forecast on the remaining 15. And so I will run lines 73 to 78, and say run. Now, okay. Now, 79 to 80 is actually, you can see here that we have median, MDV is actually median value of owner-occupied homes so it's actually the predictor there, the dependent variable, while others are independent. You know that I said principal component regression. Okay, now if we run lines 79 to 80, we are going to have the output. Look at the output. This is what it gives us. Now, we can see all the components, 13 components altogether. I think I said that we have 4 minutes left for this meeting. It's counting down. Now, 14 components.
Sorry, sir. For the principal component, please let's start the principal component from the beginning. We'll stop this one and we'll all join for the last step so that we can use that period for principal components and for the you can go on, sir.
All right. Now, starting from the principal component analysis, the library required for that is mass. And inside the mass, we have data set called Boston, which is talking about the owner-occupied homes and the other variables. So now we want to train the model based on 490 out of 506, 490 data points. Then we use the remaining 15 to test. And that is what we have in lines 76 and 77 respectively. Now we call the PLS package required to fit principal component regression. Okay, so which I've done already here. I copied from here down to this place. Then I run. You can see run up here. Then okay. It's all right. So now, line 79 is actually the model. You can see B fits PCR into MDV, then the independence, all those ones. Number of components is actually needs to be specified. If you put anything less, it just do less components. So the data set is Boston. Validation is leave out one cross validation. You can as well use K-fold cross validation. We now define your K, what your fold is. But since you have decided to use LOV, it's just to leave out one. You leave out one for testing, then the remaining for for training. So the summary B-fit gives us our the resulting component. So this is what we have. Now, looking at what we have here, we have the CV. Now you can see it says cross-validation using 506 leave out. Okay, I'm coming. All right, all right. Actually, this was meant to be B-train, not Boston. Let me change it. Take note, because I'm using the entire data set by using Boston. So B-train. With B-train, let me change it. Take note. B-train now will give us something different. Let's see. Okay, now looking at this, it's a 490 by 13, meaning I've used 490 to train. Now look at the output. This one is cross validation, adjusted cross validation, and this is root mean square. Now look at it. To determine which component that your data stops, you look at the minimum CV, the minimum cross validation, and when you look across all this, the minimum still goes to the 13th component. Is that not it? It goes to the 13th component. So by implication, what will need to be done there is just OLS, because if you are using the entire variables, it's actually telling you that all the components are what are good. So actually you are doing OLS there. And we look at this training, the variance explained. At that point, look at this. It said variance explained 1, 2. Even when you look at it, even the first component is sufficient, because what it does is that what the principal component does is just to maximize the variance as much as possible, so that the variance accumulated at that point, it will just give you the component required to explain. But at this point, when we look at it critically, 96% is sufficient to explain. Component 1 and 2 is sufficient to explain what happened to the variables. Okay. But this one is telling us that the cross validation here is telling us that, well, we can as well use the entire variables or the component. But these are variance explained. By the time we do our script plot, to be able to make better decisions. So let's go to our validation plots. Lines 81 to, okay, I'm coming. Okay, let's go to lines 81. Okay, see what line 81 gives us. It's actually telling us, you look at it, you can see that even the component 1, you can see what it gives us, our root mean square. Okay, let's do lines 82. Run line 82. Then we have our AB line, to put a line there. Now, this one is telling us that, okay, at the 8th component, can actually hold it there. So from component 8, we can say, okay, you can actually describe or what happens to the variables based on 8th component. You can see that line there. That line actually cut it from there. But when we proceed, you will see what it will still tell us. Now, let's look at the R square now. Let's look at lines 85 to 87. Okay, look at our R squared. Look at what it's telling us. The R squared value that we have already, so it's still pointing to the 8th component. Okay, now let's look at this plot again. Okay, now look at what it is. You can see that our CV and our adjusted CV, they are not too different from each other. So let's look at lines 91. 91. Okay, look at the predicted, the two components. You can see validation. Okay. So this is what happened in each component. Component 1, 80.5. Component 2, 16 points. So we've had up this actually is sufficient to describe the components. So let's look at the next, that's 93. Okay. Now look at the variance. In each component, you can see the variance explained there, 0.804, just like we have already actually. This has already been given, but this is just to give us a different version of it. Now let's now predict. Now we can see that I want to predict now B-fits with the new data. Now, we want to predict based on what we already have from the training set. And you can see that our new data is what? Is B-tests. So let's now see what it looks like. The prediction. Now, this is what we have as a prediction. You can see, you can actually obtain the mean of this and see. And don't forget that the MDV is saying median value of owners occupied homes in $1,000. So what we have here multiplied by 1,000. So what it's telling us is that if we are to predict the median value of owners home occupied, the next 15, we are to predict now, this particular one gives us the prediction that it could be, should we consider 15 owners, owner-occupied homes? This is what the value would be like. That is the house, the type of house they live, what they pay, because it's a matter of choice. If you occupy based on, and the variables are also there. We talk about proportion of non-retail business per town. We have average number of rooms per dwelling. We have proportion of owner-occupied units built prior 19. We have so many other ones. Okay, we also have tax. So this actually gives us what the prediction would be like. Now let's now see the plots. Now looking at the plot that was earlier explained in the slide, you see that the one that mostly describes what happened, that the component 1, what that mostly describe what happened in component 1 is that of the 10th variable, which is a tax, and that is full value property tax rate per 10,000. So if your tax is high, obviously you might consider that might form your decision, the type of home you want to live in. Okay, now in component 2, which is a dotted line, you can see the highest peak there is, I think that goes to component 13 or so. I think that's component 13. And that is lower status of the population in percentage. So the status now of the population determines, is actually grossly determined in component 2. And that is mostly determined. In component 3, we can see that the 7th variable, right, is supposed to be, it's not age, proportion of owner-occupied units built prior 1940. And you can see that it has negative impact on median value of owners occupied homes. It has a negative impact on it. So that is that for, then let's look at our root mean square plots. Okay. Okay, so that's what we have. We have have I done this? Okay. Yes. So now for the test, we can see for the test, what is this list here? We have 4.527. Then we also have 4.616. I think 4.4. 13th component actually is the lowest, which actually we can see. We now compare the lowest for the test here in component 13 and lowest for the training set in component 13. Do they really agree? Let's look at it. The testing is 4.888. Then here we have 4.5. So there's no issue of overfitting there. They are close. There's no issue of overfitting. And we have defined our overfitting earlier as low training MSC and high test MSC. It could be whatever error you want to use to measure it. So in this case, they are at par. There's not too much difference between them. So, and that is just that for that particular one. So let's go to the one that will bring out the unsupervised part more, which is in that case, we will need DevTools package, and we call the required package. If you have it already in your library, you run it. Then the Boston, we actually left out MDV actually, but that's why I say from 2 to 14. You can see from variables 2 to 14. Then we have our summary, which is here. Okay. It's running. So let's wait for the results. Okay. Okay. Now, looking at this, we can see that this represents the importance component, standard deviation, proportion of variance, cumulative proportion, and all. So you can see from component 1 to 13, if we even make it 1 to 14, let's see, 1 to 14, considering bringing in the MDV. Okay, let's have it this way. Since we say all the variables are important, there's no one that is less important. So we also consider the median value of owner-occupied homes. So let's now go to the biplots now. We get our biplots. Look at this. The ones on the right, they have the same relationship. The one on the left have inverse with the ones on the right. While the ones on the left have the same type of relationship, whether positive or negative. Now, let's now see these three plots. Okay. Okay. Okay, yeah. I didn't pick it from there. Wow. The script log is saying that, okay, from component 2, you can see where the line deviates. After 2, the thing just went straight down. So it shows that we can actually rely on 2 components. So let's go back to the results in the components. Components 1 and 2. We can see that, let's see. Now, we have our CRM is per capita crime rates by town. ZN, proportion of residual land zone for lots over 25,000 square feet. Now you can see that these 2 variables, the first 2 have inverse relationship, and all those ones with inverse relationship, actually, you can see negative and positive. This is blocking me actually. Okay, good. So let's see what happens there. Now, even with MED V, the MED V that actually form the dependent variable in the principal component regression, you can see that it only have positive relation, the same relation, not inverse now, with black. DIS. DIS is weighted mean distance of 5 Boston employment centers. CHS actually means Charles River, is a dummy variable, whether it's on the side of the river or not. Then we have some other ones. So in component 2, and don't forget that in component 1, we said it's not the 7th one that most describe the, okay, that should be age. Is it not age? You can go there and check anyway. Let's go back and check in component 1. Using the PCR, okay, that's component 10, which is tax actually. So that is the most important variable there. So and that's supposed to be tax now. So we can see, all right. So now, then these are other plots that we could do. Okay, this is actually the proportion of the variance explained. You can see the script plot and all. So by and large, we've been able to see how this works. Now, when we talk about principal component analysis, some people just limit it to after data reduction or dimension reduction, use the remaining dimension to now fit your regression. But in unsupervised learning, it is viewed beyond that. It is viewed beyond just obtain reduced dimension and use the reduced dimension to fit your data set or to determine your variables that will be retained. Now, we have been able to see how this works in the case of unsupervised learning. That is where variables, there's no important variable, variables, you're able to identify relationship among variables. We can see that all these variables have relationship among themselves, and we can see how this works. So with that, I think I should be drawing the curtain here. So Dr. Okay, over to you.
Thank you so much. God bless you for the passion you have for this. And please, I want you to drop a chat, every one of us, just drop a message on the chat.